Hello. Welcome. This is first. We're gonna try this out and see how it goes. So I kind of got the setting here. Actually, wait. Can I turn off like the UI? Let me see here. Interface. UI dynamic minimal. Let's turn outside. Well, I didn't really change much. Okay, but anyway, here we go. Today we're gonna be reading a book. Um, it's a it's another Warhammer book. But it's one I kind of wanted to read maybe on the side, so you can listen to it whenever you want. Um, this one is called Siege of Wrath, a Death Corps novel. So let's see how the first page starts out. I'm probably just gonna read just one chapter, um, and then we'll put it up. Prologue: The Spark. The assassin held his breath. He had his target in his sights. One shot. That was all it would take. The most important shot of the assassin's career. The Cardinal Astral had emerged from his palace, as always, surrounded by his fawning retinue. His white silk robes, festooned with jewels, rosaries, marked him out from the flock. A tall, brimless white cocked hat lent him the illusion of above-average stature. He was an old man, by conventional standards, if not by those of his exalted office. Dry skin stretched across his cheekbones. White eyes lurked in the foxholes of their sockets. The most holy man in the Sakaris sector. The assassin didn't think about that now. He didn't doubt it. His masters believed his target deserved to die, or at least that his death would serve some higher purpose. And so, although not privy to their reasons, he believed it too. The learned minds of the Ordo Hereticus were far wiser than the dull-witted laborers of the gray armory world. So bestowed had the latter become with their shiny new demagogue. Getting into the citadel had been the easy part. The assassin had posed as one of the thousands of worshippers welcomed daily through the streets, through the St. Leonis gate. He had lain for 3 days, face down on a ledge jutting from the towering main spire of the basilica. His stealth suit rendered him all but invisible to sensors. He drank in nutrients through a feeding tube and kept his trained muscles rigid. To his right, the ground dropped steeply away into the citadel ravine. Splayed out before him was the palace's outer courtyard, steaming in the mid-morning sun after a recent downpour. His target was moving across this, a clear shot blocked by other heads and marble pillars. He would be out of range in only seconds. The assassin's finger tightened on the trigger. One shot. Seconds later, he was running. His cumbersome equipment, including his rifle, lay abandoned on the ledge, but the melted charge timed to destroy all evidence of his identity. He had squeezed back into the spire through a narrow window and pelted down an equally narrow spiral staircase. In the archway, at its foot, he collided with the wide-eyed acolyte, who froze in his path. Whipping out a pair of pistols, the assassin blew a hole in the young man's chest. Sirens wailed out from the cardinal's palace. The courtyard was filling up rapidly with uniformed disciples, already converging upon the assassin's tower as if they had known all along where he would be. Just as his target, too, had come prepared. The assassin had taken his shot, and could at least take pride in its precision. His bullet had punctured through an inconvenient pillar on its way to Cardinal Astral Zephin's head. It should have been a good, clean kill. Instead, a violent flash of golden energy had revealed that Xiphon was protected. The assassin had loosed off two more shots in haste, A second hit might well have overwhelmed whatever obscure piece of archaeotech had created a refractor field around his target. Too late. Zafin was already lost, behind a crush of devotees eager to take the bullets for him. Two had their wishes granted, staining mosaic flooring with their blood. He had failed in his mission and was unlikely to get another chance. The assassin had no higher purpose at this moment than to save himself. His escape route through the courtyard was definitely blocked. He ducked through the nearest doorway back into the bacilla, then raced along a high vaulted passageway, firing over his shoulder to discourage pursuers. Strangled yelps informed him that some of his blind shots had struck true, but still the echoing clatter of booted footsteps slowly gained on him. A bullet whizzed past his ear. He heard more cries and footsteps, closing in ahead of him. The assassin was cornered, at last, in the building's ancient vaults. Though 3 more guards fell to his blazing pistols, never was his fate in question. The assassin died in darkness, in a hail of small weapons fire, choking on grenade smoke, amid the disapproving ghosts of long-departed pilgrims. By day's end, his corpse would be paraded through the citadel's streets. The spectacle would be vid-linked across the planet, sparking furious riots. Strident preachers would call the assassin a tool of the traitors in the highest imperial offices. They would say that golden light of the emperor himself had foiled their plans, but would warn that more attacks were sure to follow, and that one man alone could defend this world against them. The people would listen and believe, and thus their hearts and minds were captured, just as their Messiah, the Cardinal Astral, had intended all along, just as his sage advisors had foretold. One shot, that was all it would have taken. One shot to end a single life, and in so doing, save many millions more. The most important shot of the assassin's own life, his dying thought, his final numbing realization, was that he had been lured into a trap. One shot could have ended a bloody war before it had even begun. It had ignited one instead. Act 1. Opening shots. Vrak would not be brought to heel without a long and bloody fight. Its major assets, its citadel and starport, were heavily defended. They possessed sufficient firepower to blast a fleet of cruisers out of orbit. Blockades would take too long to have an effect. That left only one option. An army would be landed on the planet's surface. They would win back Vrak's barren ground inch by inch, hard-fought inch. The Astra Militarum turned to the Krieg, of course. Soldiers bred upon that world, my world, are siege specialists, uniquely equipped for the grind of long wars of attrition. We were chosen for that reason, and I believe one other. There were an estimated 8 million people on Vrax. It had to be assumed that most were under its new ruler's thrall. Our tacticians calculated that each of their lives would cost only 2 of our own. We were glad to make that sacrifice. By the time I came to visit Vrax, I had already lived a longer life than I ever imagined. Like most of my comrades in arms, I had gone there to die. Instead, Vrax is where I was reborn. Extracted from the account of veteran Colonel Tyborg, 26th Krieg Siege Regiment, seconded into the service of Inquisitor Lord Odo. The black train snaked its way across the rocky plain. A mighty engine bellowed with the strain of pulling its heavy carriages. Its steel wheels shrieked and threw off sparks as they resisted old, worn brakes. They were wrestled to a juddering halt at last, the engine's black nose nuzzling the buffer where its track abruptly ended. For a minute, it sat groaning with relief, marinating in steam, sweating pungent oil. Then the doors of its carriages flew open. Gray figures were disgorged by the thousand. They guarded their identities beneath gray coats, plasteel helms, and rebreather masks with round, blanked eyepieces. It was almost impossible to tell one from another, as they set about the barren ground with picks and shovels. These were the soldiers of the fabled Death Corps of Krieg. They had come to save this world by re-establishing the Emperor's control over it. Right now, that meant establishing a foothold here, at the end of the line. Confessor Ignia Tenexus stepped down from her carriage. She strode through the busy corpsmen, who parted before her, maintaining a differential bubble of space around her. She planted her oak staff in the ground, disturbing ancient layers of volcanic dust. Her nose wrinkled at the sulfur smell, but she was used to it by now. She straightened her back and allowed her chest to swell as her eyes drank in the sight before her. The citadel of Rax, constructed upon the remains of a long extinct volcano, it loomed above the surrounding flat expanses. Its tallest structure, its sensorium tower, drew the confessor's admiring gaze. She thought about its faithful choir of astropaths, torn apart by a fearful mob even as they sent a distress message out into the warp. It was elsewhere, however, that her true interest lay. The Basilica of St. Leonis, the Blind. Just a glimpse of its ornate spires sent a thrill of devotion through her unworthy body. The Blessed Leonis shrine was one of the holiest sites in the sector. Its likely desecration by the apostate cardinal and his band of brainwashed traitors was almost more than Tenexus could bear. It pained her to be standing here, so close yet so very far away. Too much time had already passed since the first dropships had put down on the planet's far side, out of reach of the Citadel's laser defenses. For almost a year, Krieg corpsmen supported by a sizable penal labor force had dug trenches, erected standard pattern Munitorum facilities, laid railroad tracks, and unloaded vast quantities of weapons and provisions from supply shuttles. Almost a year, during which the apostate cardinal had stayed safe behind his walls and poisoned who knew how many minds with his blasphemous teachings. Now at last the Krieg were ready to wage war upon their enemies. Black carriages stretched out for over a mile behind her. Gray figures poured unabated from them, spread out across the Van Merselen wastes. Their orders were to establish a forward depot here, from which they could dig towards the first of the enemy's defensive lines, 30 miles ahead of them. Imperial tacticians savants had calculated that it would take 12 years to win this war. 12 years before Zaffin would be punished for his sins. 12 years before Tenaxis could set foot inside the holy shrine again and assess the damage to it. Around her, the Krieg were working tirelessly, painstakingly, as they always did. They gave Tenaxis faith that they would meet the expectations placed upon them. She prayed to the Emperor to grant her but a fraction of their patience. At 166813.M41, the first shot of the First War officially fired. Dawn's light found the forward trenches packed with rows of gray soldiers standing stiffly to attention. For the first time in months, the clatter of their activity had ceased. Vrax had no native fauna, and the air was still that day, so not a breath of sound disturbed the utmost silence. Then a Vox console crackled into life. Its terse message rippled through the earthworks. Passed down from officer to officer, Lieutenant Marot heard it from his company captain, who in turn had received her orders from Colonel Byron. "Open fire!" Marot's barked command echoed out along the trench to each side of him. A moment later, though all voices but the ones in his earpiece were drowned out as Vrax's silence was irrevocably shattered. 1,000 gun crews, including the 4 under his command, jerked into practice action. Their Earthshaker cannons and bombards were already aimed and loaded, and now their pent-up fury was unleashed. Their targets were their enemies' bunkers and pillboxes, connected by low reinforced ferrocite walls, but Vox reports from spotters with magnoculars confirmed that their explosive shells were falling short. They pulverized rock and punched new craters into the ground as if punishing the very planet for the actions of its people. This was only as expected. The enemy, so quiet these past few months, was soon returning fire. The vast stores of Vrax were theirs to plunder, so of course they had no shortage of weapons of their own, forged for the Emperor, now turned upon his followers instead. Few of their shells would make it to the Krieg trenches either, but there was always the small chance of a lucky shot. Even over the gun's incessant roar, Marat heard a fearsome blast and felt the ground tremble. One of his crews was showered with gray dust and red-hot shrapnel, which clattered off their helmets. A corpsman stumbled. The heavy shell that he had the heavy shell that he and a comrade were hefting almost slipped through their fingers. Marat admonished the corpsman and bawled at the rest of his gunners too, to work harder, faster, more efficiently. Just one more shot can make a difference. Take a life that tips a balance. Few of his words would reach their ears, but in truth they didn't matter. They knew the words by now, and their duty. The soldiers of Krieg knew what the Emperor required of them. The artillery duel continued throughout the morning. It was brief, uninterrupted. In the early afternoon, by one of Vrax's frequent lightning storms, the crashing of thunder in the heavens almost matched that of the now stilled cannons. The Krieg took shelter in their dugouts as rivers of gray slime slapped against the wooden slats of duckboards. With the storm's abrupt cessation, the air felt thick and warm and newly sulphurous. Not that the Krieg could feel or smell it, through their layers of filtration and protection. They returned to their stations and resumed their pitiless bombardment. Its effect, if any, at this distance was impossible to know, but the enemy's guns seemed muted. Imperial commissars maintained that the traitors were losing their nerve, lacking the fortitude that faith in a just cause granted. They still rather less about the shell. They still rather less about the shell that struck the 413th Battery, destroying an Earthshaker and cremating its 8-strong crew. Lieutenant Marat heard the news over the command box channel, but kept it to himself. His corpsmen were used to living under death's long shadow. He had already lived too long himself, to which the stripes on his shoulders testified. Regardless of the ever-present threats, life in the trenches settled into repetitive routine. Marat bunked in a hollow cut into the side of a claustrophobic dugout, which he shared with 4 other junior officers. Each moonless night, the thunder of Krieg's guns lulled him into a dreamless slumber. On the 12th night, the less familiar sound of raised voices jerked him out of it. Intruders had broken through a tunnel wall and been challenging, oh, challenged by a sentry. By the time Mara and 3 score of corpsmen crowded onto the scene, the matter had already been settled. The bombardment had served its primary purpose. It had provided cover for the members of the 158th Regiment to slip out into no man's land and start to dig. They had begun with foxholes, 6 feet deep, then worked for 3 days underground, connecting those foxholes with tunnels, creating a network, which they had extended back towards the Krieg's existing trenches. We had to take a detour to avoid a large granite deposit, a sergeant explained. He looked like a statue. his uniform caked with gray dirt apart from his finger-shaped smears across his gas mask lenses. It threw us several degrees off still. Our squad is the first to make it back. Is that confirmed? The question was directed at the corpsman behind him, who had been murmuring into a concealed comm bead. It is, Sergeant, he reported, with something like pride in his tone. The going is heavy down there? Merritt asked. No, sir, the sergeant replied. Mostly it is, as we have seen everywhere else, light, porous rock, like pumice. Barely a challenge. That is good to know, said Morat. It should certainly speed up operations, the sergeant agreed. That was not my meaning. Merritt turned on his heel and marched back towards his dugout, continuing over his shoulder. If I am to lie forever in this planet's dirt, it is good to know that it will be nice and soft and comfortable. Those words came back to haunt him the very next day. He was summoned away from the front lines to a meeting at the landing site. The 17th Company commanders of the 143rd Siege Regiment crowded into a briefing room to await their commander's arrival. Merritt was there on his captain's behalf, as she was nursing a shrapnel wound. He felt an unfamiliar tingle in the pit of his stomach, which might have been anticipation. His regiment had been the first to arrive on Vrax. They had worked long, punishing shifts to secure the landing site, and hadn't stopped working in the years since then. Merritt knew that every mine laid, every crate unloaded, every entrenching tool thrusting into the dirt was a vital step towards their goal. Even so, he had caught himself wondering when he might see combat again, when his turn might come to be sent out to expend his life in the Emperor's service. That moment was settling here. The arrival of a nosy locomotive rattled the room's shuttered windows. Hardly a minute later, Colonel Thyron and his entourage strode in. Though the air was breathable, and he was far from the fighting, Thyron wore the standard issue gas mask, unlike the officers of other worlds. He displayed none of his many honors. His eagle crest helm, red sash, and rank insignia sufficed for battlefield identification. And that's where I have to stop for now. um, but we will have to remember page 21. I have to get going though. Till next time.